Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
It really isn't the physical changes anymore, HIV. It's definitely what it does to you mentally. It's the mental journey that you go through.
The reality now of living with HIV that feels like something out of sci-fi, whereby they got the virus, they put it in that little cage. That is an incredible advance. And I think it's about time that our attitude's almost caught up with those advances.
Overwhelmed does not even, my life just changed again because it felt like I was finally reaching that new level of acceptance with myself and the fact that I'd had the courage to just be open about myself.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.
Tackling the stigma.
And it's back and it's December. And it's Mental Health Monday with me, Mick Coyle. I do hope you're well. Thank you for checking out the programme this week and really appreciate all your warm words, kind words, emails, contacts in regard to the programme and everything that we're getting on with. We're absolutely chock-a-block booked up until, well into the new year now. But as ever, if you've got a story, if we can bump you up the agenda, if it's urgent to get that story out, my email address you can find in the details for the podcast, and I'll put the details in the audio boom write-up for this week's podcast. As ever, we say if you're listening to Mental Health Monday, you can hashtag Mental Health Monday on whichever social media feeds you're on. Lets other people know the podcast is available. And this week's show comes off the back of December the 1st's World AIDS Day. Now, I did a load of work around World AIDS Day this week in regard to the incredible scientific advancements around the treatment for HIV. It was a fascinating conversation. But actually, so much of what was being said in the conversations I was having wasn't about the physical side of things, which in many ways, when it comes to HIV, has been boxed off scientifically, dealt with. As long as you are made aware that you've got HIV, you can get treatment and live a long and healthy life. It's incredible, the science around this whole thing. More so, it's about stigma. It's about issues in regard to how you deal with the idea of HIV based on things you've learnt or been told about in the past. So actually mental health became an absolutely crucial part of this conversation, which is why I've put this interview together now for Mental Health Monday, which you're going to hear with Jay Hawkridge. Now, Jay was diagnosed just over a year ago with HIV, and you'll hear in the conversation about the journey that he went on in regard to telling people about his diagnosis and living with the diagnosis. As you'll hear from a physical point of view, couple of tablets a day and lead a long and healthy life. And actually, while his viral load is so low because of the medication, won't even pass it on to partners. Like I say, the science is incredible, but there's so much more to the journey. And that's what we're talking about on this week's Mental Health Monday. Get involved on the social media if you can, Facebook, Twitter, wherever it is. Hashtag Mental Health Monday. I started off by asking Jay this week how 2020 was going for him.
2020 has been nothing short of incredible, really. I mean, I've been diagnosed with HIV for just over a year now. So I spent the first half of this year with my diagnosis still a secret from a lot of people because I was still processing, understanding, obviously adjusting to the pandemic that the world was going through, as well as my own personal battle. So for me, it really has been probably the biggest year of my life in terms of personal growth. It's been extremely difficult and tense in terms of kind of like balancing career, life, personal fitness, health, well-being. There's been so many balls in the air at all times. But I really feel that, if anything, the pandemic was the final straw of like a big wake-up call that has been going for quite a while now. So I'm quite pleased to say that I'm actually finding myself in a very positive place at the end of it, despite how isolating and lonely it's been at times when I've been kind of suffering with something that has been a journey that I've been going through on my own. It's very nice to have had a little bit of extra time to sit down, take a pause and understand what I'm going through, and then feel like I can catch up with the rest of the world in a sense, if you understand.
What are those sort of judgments? What are those ideas that are sort of going through your mind as you're talking about, this idea of telling people about your HIV diagnosis? What were those preconceptions, that idea of stigma that you had in your mind that made you think, right, how are people going to respond here?
So I'll be 110% honest. I never, ever, ever thought that I would catch HIV. I didn't even realize that it was still something that was present today. coming like from a rural Yorkshire background, I had no education at all regarding HIV. Barely had any sexual health education in school, let alone LGBTQI plus education. So it was just something that was never really presented to me. And then I obviously found out that I had it last year, and my initial thought was, oh no, like I was thinking, what information and preloaded kind of sense do I have of HIV? And I realized it was very little, but the only like memory that I could recall were films like Philadelphia, Rent the musical. It was all portrayed in a very harsh and fatal light almost. So obviously your mind kind of starts to go into panic mode. And it wasn't until I spent a couple of months understanding, talking through with my doctor and my clinic, researching. I researched a lot online of my own kind of like realities of a modern day diagnosis, that I realized that the face of HIV today is completely different. There are an entirely new generation of people living with HIV, and this is something that I think has definitely been forgotten, is how many people are still living with it today. So it's really interesting. So I only told a couple of people. I told my best friend and I told another friend. And then I spent about 4 months with just two people as my entire support line, while I, again, understood and researched myself. And then I finally had the courage to tell my mum in March. So this was about 5 months after diagnosis. And it's one of those things where I didn't want to tell anybody over Christmas, any of my family members, because I didn't want them to associate it with Christmas. And then my birthday is just before Christmas, so I didn't want it to be associated with my birthday. And then my little brother's birthday was just after Christmas, so I didn't want it to be associated then. So it was just one of those things where you kind of find, really, You find really easy excuses to just keep living by yourself with this thing. And then eventually I just came out and told my mum and said, look, I think there's something that you need to know. I think it's time that I feel comfortable enough to share it with you. And all the stigma that I thought I was going to get, and all the judgment and all the kind of fear that had been imposed on me from an early age around HIV was not present at all. Not present at all. I was quite surprised when I started opening up and telling people how not educated they were, but how willing to be educated they were. It wasn't oh my God, this is my idea of HIV. Is that the truth? It was a very, oh, I'm not really sure what that means at all. Would you care to enlighten me? And so it's actually really interesting. So I actually became public with my diagnosis on LinkedIn first. I basically, I realized like in lockdown that I was going to have to start telling people at some point. And I wanted to as well. I'd become so comfortable with myself and become so accustomed to it on a daily basis in my social circles that I was thinking, well, if I am so comfortable, why am I not telling people? Why am I keeping this secret? So I realized that instead of having the same conversation with hundreds of people and the same questions and the same messages incoming with the same, I just couldn't be bothered with any of that. So I had the idea and I was like, why don't I make a little PDF document that says key info about my journey, and it also gives key statistics, key facts and figures, and helps people understand something that is concise, simple, but people will be able to access from anywhere, and then they can read, understand my point of view, and also by the end of it, they'll have a grander idea of HIV as a whole. So I made this PDF and threw it on LinkedIn because not many people in my personal life know me on LinkedIn, and I was thinking it's not going to travel around like gossip if I threw it on LinkedIn. So I did that. LinkedIn reacted fantastically to it, as LinkedIn did. They were eating it up. And then it was one weekend in June, I just kind of pretended like I was a music artist dropping an album, and I just kind of surprised in the morning threw this PDF on all of my socials, and then just went ghost for an entire day and just put my phone down and just went for a walk in Liverpool around the docks, did some biking, hung out with some friends, and I was just like, feels really nice. It feels really freeing. And then I came back to my phone in the evening, and overwhelmed does not even, like, my life just changed again, because it felt like I was finally reaching that new level of acceptance with myself, and the fact that I'd had the courage to just be open about myself. But in all honesty, like I said, stigma was not present at all. Not one negative reaction. I mean, I think that's quite a testament to the people that I have around me anyway, because I like to really be careful about the energy that I let in. But it was a proud moment for me personally, and I was really proud of everybody that I had in my life, because it was very accepting, especially for a younger generation, was something that, again, they will have grown up similar to me, knowing, all these horrible demons and kind of like all these scary images of what HIV is like. There was no miseducation. There was no kind of bold claims about how long are you going to live, like, what is the reality like how have you changed physically. I think because I'd been living with it now for like a few months and not one person had picked up on it, that was the most impactful thing, is because no one realized. And that is the reality, because it really isn't the physical changes anymore, HIV. It's definitely what it does to you mentally. It's the mental journey that you go through. So I think for everyone to see that I had been battling with that and communicating with them in the exact same way that I always had, really eradicated that stigma straight away, squashed it out like a bug.
That's brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant that you had such a positive experience. I don't think I know anyone who's ever released any kind of personal information about themselves via a PDF on LinkedIn. It's not often the go-to place, but actually it's interesting that just that one avenue eased the information out there, which then obviously made you feel much more comfortable about doing it in a much more public way. It's quite strange. It's almost like that idea of did it feel almost like people, when they talk about if they're revealing anything about their sexuality, they talk about coming out. Did you feel like it was something that needed to be in the public? Did you feel it, not in the public, but amongst your friends, about, did it feel important to let people know? Because arguably you could say, well, it won't affect them in any way, shape or form, and actually they won't see the difference in me because of the retrovirals that I'm taking. So actually they don't necessarily need to know. What was it, do you think, in terms of thinking, well, I would rather they knew, I'd rather let them know what was going on?
So there's kind of two levels to this. There's two tiers. So the first tier is that I wanted to let the people that were really close to me know, simply because I like my friends to fully understand me, to understand what I'm going through, to be as close as possible. So I actually came out on Instagram on my close friends list like 12 hours before dropping it to everybody else, simply because I wanted to tell the people that mattered to me most. But in all honesty, to be deadly honest, so it wasn't really about me. When I was doing it, I knew that the people in my life would be comfortable. I knew that no one would, was most likely not to change their opinions of me, change the behavior around me. But the main thing that I kind of did out of frustration, I guess, maybe like 20% out of frustration, simply because I had gotten myself to such a place where I was really confident and feeling strong with my diagnosis, which initially, if you would have flashed me right back to when I first was diagnosed, I never thought I would be comfortable enough or in that position to be so open with it. So I kind of felt like I owed it to myself for how far I'd come. I kind of felt like I was sitting on all this strength and all this kind of like possibility. And I was thinking, how selfish is this to keep this to myself? Because when I was researching HIV and, a modern day diagnosis, I can't give you one example of information that I found about young people living with HIV today. Like when I was offered counselling and people to talk to at my clinic, which is a lovely thing that they offer, the minimum age of the person that I would be counselled with was like early 40s. And, there's a lot different between the two generations living today. Like you've got an entirely different growing up experience. You've got social media, you've got like friendships, relationships. The landscape of dating is completely different to how someone a couple of decades older than myself would view it. So it just didn't feel like I had anybody to relate to. And I thought, well, luckily I am living in Birmingham. I'm living in quite a metropolitan city. Like I've got friends that are similar to me with lifestyles. I've got gay friends, I've got a lot of friends with similar interests. So I was thinking, what if I was still living in rural Yorkshire and I had no gay friends and I had no gay community? There was no outreach. There was no kind of, there was no release for me to feel included. And I still felt as isolated as I did when I lived back up north. And I was like, if I went online and still found no one that I could relate to, that would just be even more isolating, and I would feel even more cut off from the rest of the world. So I just simply thought that if I could just be me, as kind of freeing as that could be, and if someone could find that and take anything away from my journey that might help them, like that just became the nice motive for it, really, because I just wanted to kind of show that it is possible and it is out there.
Absolutely. I think people will understand that. We talk about sort of the mental health side of things as well. Just for people who don't know, can you just give us a sense now of the physical health outlook that you've got? Because there'll be people listening to this now who are thinking, well, I actually don't really know. Just tell us maybe what your GP tells you now about sort of how life will pan out for you living with HIV.
Yeah, so they actually sold it to me quite well. They made it seem really appealing, almost ironically, because now I take 2 tablets a day. I can't tell you the names because they're really long and complicated, but essentially what they do, so a HIV diagnosis revolves around 2 things. It revolves around the viral load, which is how much of the virus is in your body, and it revolves around your CD4 count, which is your white blood cells, which is your body's natural defense. So it's like attack and defense, think. So the viral load is there to attack. Now, when you are first diagnosed with HIV, you may be asymptomatic. Some people don't get any symptoms. Some people get a short, like flu, cold-like virus type thing that you are quite easy to dismiss as just a cold and flu, and you go about your business. Now, with me, I genetically have a really rubbish immune system anyway, so it hit me really hard. So when the virus started to rapidly replicate when I caught it, my body went into something called seroconversion, which is where the virus kind of spikes and replicates as fast as possible and super fast and goes to like the highest level that it is, and then it kind of simmers. And that's why people associate the seroconversion. The spike is the flu, and then it simmers out and then gradually replicates a little bit more, but just so silently and kind of deadly until it's too late a few years down the line if you don't get tested. So my doctor explained it to me that the viral load is there to go up, but my medication, what it does is it brings my viral load so far down that it makes the possibility of me transmitting HIV 0%. So I am something called undetectable. And there's a big campaign at the minute, which is called U=U, which stands for undetectable equals untransmittable, because I'm not going to throw the facts at you because I can't quite remember them, but there's been thousands of people involved in this study for U=U, and what it has been determined is that there were 0 transmissions of HIV in these studies that were between 2 partners, one who was HIV positive and one who was HIV negative. So that was the big kind of breath for me, in the sense that I would still be able to date, I would still be able to see people, and there would be no kind of risk for me to pass on HIV. Now, obviously, with my medication, keeping the viral load as low as possible and transmissible, that means that my CD4 count, my white blood cell count, can start to go up, because when I was first diagnosed and went into seroconversion, the viral load shot up and it just attacked and ravaged my immune system, which is why I was so ill that I actually ended up in hospital with it, because it was a really bad fever, flu. It was horrible. So my CD4 count now has steadily risen again, and my viral load is now really low. And that is going to remain as it is as long as I'm taking my medication, in routine. There is 0 risk that my viral load is going to go back up. There's 0 risk that I can transmit HIV. So essentially, it's a really strange paradox, because I have it, but at the same time, there are no physical health effects. It's contained in this little cage somewhere inside me, because it can't do anything to my body personally. It can't get out into someone else's body. So it's a really surreal feeling to be living with it and taking medication for it every day, but also there's no trace of it, there's no sign of it, there's no way that it can do anything at all.
I think there'll be people, though, who've just listened to that and they will be thinking, I've grown up in an era of hearing about Freddie Mercury, Diana shaking hands with people who are dying with AIDS, and they've associated and lumped in HIV with all of those thoughts, preconceptions, and the stigma maybe that came with that. And yet you've just described the reality now of living with HIV that feels like something out of sci-fi, whereby they got the virus, they put it in that little cage, they trapped it in bodies, it can't get out, and as long as the medication continues, then you get to live a safe, happy, I'm going to say normal life, whatever that means, and that is an incredible advance in science, and I think it's about time that our attitudes almost caught up with those advances.
God, yeah, it is nothing short of a miracle, really. Like I had no idea that this medication was around and available before diagnosis. I had no idea that HIV was still present. So to go instantly from finding out I had HIV and this immense weight and pressure and fear to then in the same initial appointment when I found out with my diagnosis to being found out the actual reality of it. It was just like whiplash. It was incredible. And the way that my doctor kind of added that extra cherry on top was because obviously now I have, when you first are diagnosed with HIV, you have really regular blood tests while they monitor your initial reaction to the virus, whether they monitor like how fast you become undetectable, your viral load. It's all very, very strict until you are on this treatment, on the course. They can see that it's working. They can see there's no side effects, no adverse health effects. And now I only go to my clinic twice a year for a blood test. Like it's only biannually. And the way that my clinic kind of sell this to me is they said, well, when we do your blood test for HIV, they test kind of like everything that you could test for. It's like going in for a full MOT if I was a car. And so they said from now on until the end of your life, your long and happy life, they said you're going to be constantly monitored and looked at. They were like, if you have any precursors in later life of getting diabetes, of heart disease, of stroke, of anything that may occur to me later in life, they were like, we will be the first to pick up on it. It will not be 4 years and then you'll go to the doctor feeling ill and all of a sudden you've got this big kind of fatal thing. They were like, you are being monitored, constantly. So in reality, it's kind of reassuring to know that I now have access to this and that I am, if anything, because of HIV, I'm allowing myself to stay in better health. It's really strange.
One of the reports from the HIV Commission for World AIDS Day this year is talking about HIV testing, but for all that some people occasionally will get blood tests. And actually what the report recommends is that essentially when they're doing that, they should recommend for HIV testing, and I'm preempting that there'll be some people who hear about that and they'd always go, what? How dare you suggest that HIV may be a factor in my life? But knowledge is power, isn't it? And I think if you know, obviously you can take action. Plus, you can get a much more, better series of data about how many people potentially are living with HIV but don't know about it as well. What do you make of that as an idea that everybody should almost be aware of their HIV status?
I think that's phenomenal. I think that really is the way to go with it. I mean, so it's really interesting to note. So people associate HIV with just people that are gay. Whereas if you actually look at the stats and the facts and the figures, I'm 99% confident that the last figures released in 2018 from the National AIDS Trust were saying that 46% of transmissions were through heterosexual sex, which is a really kind of monumental figure because you don't expect that at all. You kind of think it is something, especially when you are fed ideologies by the media of the original epidemic with gay black men. You kind of associate it still in just those categories. So it's really interesting to note that like anybody can have HIV. Like HIV isn't a specific virus. It doesn't target certain demographics. It doesn't live in certain demographics. Like it's a virus. It can replicate. It doesn't care. Do you know what I mean? And it's also really interesting to note as well. So I was in monogamous relationships most of my early 20s. And it only took one time for me to catch HIV. It's really ironic because I was just come out of a relationship and I never really been into casual encounters with anybody. And my friends kind of encouraged me to, like your friends do, get out there, see the world, like get back into the dating game. And so I found someone on Instagram. that I was attracted to, and I was like, look, like I'm not looking for anything serious, but if you want to go on a date, we can do. And they said yes, absolutely. And it was that one time. That is how I caught HIV. Like I had unprotected sex once, and then a few days later, I was in the hospital, and I don't think I'm the only person to ever be in that situation. So in reality, that could have happened to anyone. Do you know what I mean? Like it really is. You can't predict it, and these decisions that you make while you think are not that impactful on your later life, I had no idea that it was going to lead me to where I am today. So I really would advocate for testing, especially when I know since the majority of my friends have admitted to me that they are not particularly in control of their own sexual health testing. I mean, I like to pride myself on always looking out for myself, and which is why going into that situation, I asked the question of, you know, I am in control of my health. Are you in control of your health? Is this safe? And that person, for whatever reason, said they were and they weren't. And this is the thing, like you have to be certain of yourself really to go into these situations. So I would definitely advocate for testing. I think that's a really important thing, especially with the cultural shift in terms of how many people are choosing, you know, not to be monogamous, not to go in relationships at all, to date a bit more freely. Like if you're going to be entering that lifestyle, the least thing you can do is look after your sexual health, because it's just as important as any other part of your health.
Do you think it'll help as well, almost the system keep up with the way the virus might potentially be moving at the moment, that actually getting that information, knowing where it is, allows people to then make the provision, set up the support services, and obviously alert the relevant people that the medicines are required, and that, you know, appointments will be required, and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. I think it's a really good to kind of not nip it in the bud, but it's really good to get a sense of the demographics, even just geographically, and you can understand where to put the funding, where to put the help in place. Like if you imagine me, for instance, when I caught HIV, luckily, like I said, I was quite ill with mine, and I also wasn't seeing anybody else in between that period. But you imagine if I was seeing somebody and I went to see the person and I caught HIV unaware, and never got as ill as I did. Say I got flu-like symptoms, or I was asymptomatic and I didn't realize, and then I didn't get tested. And then say that I saw a couple of people in the next couple of weeks casually and didn't have anything to confess because I was completely unaware that I was, you know, I had HIV now. And if you think if I then, you know, only got tested, say a month or so down the line, or even a couple of weeks down the line, and there had been only a handful of people that I had encountered with since then, by the time that I found out, say there were 4 people that I'd seen, how many people had those 4 people seen in that time? And so by the time that I found out and told these people, they'd already had a couple of sexual partners themselves anyway. And then maybe those sexual partners had had 1 or 2 sexual partners. So it's kind of like a tree almost, in the sense that it would just fan out unintentionally and like a wildfire. So like it's, yeah, you've got to really look after it, haven't you?
Well, what you described there is, you know, with people living now and talking about understandings, you just described, you know, the coronavirus, haven't you, in terms of having coronavirus, passing it on to a family member, a loved one, travels through various different, you know, colleagues and so on and so forth. And actually you've described the same thing, almost as if, you know, there's expertise and experience there from people who've lived through the HIV pandemic, who actually could actually teach quite a lot of people quite a few lessons about maybe how we deal with the coronavirus.
God, yeah, like I really do think that HIV is almost a forgotten pandemic, in the sense that obviously the impact was devastating. I mean, tens of million people like died over the course of a few, you know, from then till now, as a direct result of HIV and AIDS. Like it's been catastrophic. So to kind of go into the 21st century and kind of not have any education, any understanding, any awareness, any history of everything that's happened, aside from a couple of media portrayals, is really, I think it's nothing short of damaging. Like I had a few friends, I think it was summertime, I'm not quite sure. The days kind of blended into one this year. But on the there's a Netflix series called 13 Reasons Why. And on their, I think it was their final season, they had a character that was actually diagnosed with HIV, and he was a young teenage lad. And I watched the clip because I was really interested in it because of the way that it was portrayed. And basically, this young teenage lad at the end of this show, I mean, this show has been quite kind of dicey in the media anyway for its portrayal of mental health and kind of like a few issues that affect young people. But basically, this young lad was diagnosed with HIV, and then he dies instantly upon diagnosis. And I was just like, what? I was like, that's not reality of it. Like, it's considering how young this lad is and how kind of, how little he's had the virus, it was really used, to me, as someone who's living with HIV, it was used as a shock tactic. It was used as a plot line that would, again, reinforce fear and make people think, oh my God, HIV is terrifying. And especially to a show that caters for such a young demographic and such a wide demographic, because it's a really big show, especially in America. I was really surprised that they chose the route to go down in terms of, because they got a lot of crossfire at the beginning for the way that they were portraying suicide and mental health. So to kind of start saying they were advocating for all these issues and showing the reality and wanting to give people as much information as possible, and then to end the show by killing their character who had HIV instantly, it was really it just didn't add up at all. And I think that was a really damaging portrayal of HIV.
I wonder whether or not, as we move forward, and I think even conversations like this will just open people's eyes to the realities. But I think throughout, people like yourself will have to constantly go through those clunks of, oh, here's somebody who doesn't get it, here's somebody who hasn't been educated, or and sometimes if you haven't been educated, it's not necessarily your fault, because you think you know the story, you think you know the narrative, but actually that might not necessarily be the case in reality, which I think that's one of we bring it back to World AIDS Day. It's one of the things where pay attention to the news stories, listen to the lived experience, because actually your attitudes will be up to date, will be modern, will be full of understanding. And then I think the other thing is, when you then do see things like you've just described there in a TV show, you'll go, that doesn't happen, that's not right, that doesn't fit in with where we are in 2020, which makes them and forces them, I think, to catch up with where things are at as well. Jay, it's been a pleasure speaking to you today. Really appreciate you sort of sharing your story and being so honest with us as well about your experiences. Really appreciate that, and best of luck with everything we're still in this lockdowny period, teary period, and as 2021 comes, we'll bring a whole host of new opportunities as well. But I wish you all the best, and thanks for speaking to us on the programme.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.